Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent weekends at the mall, she was running 5 miles before sunrise. While they painted their nails, she was doing push-ups in her garage. Her father, a retired Marine, had taught her that strength wasn't about size or gender. It was about heart and determination. At 22, Sarah worked as a fitness trainer at the local gym. She had a lean, muscular build that came from years of disciplined training. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her brown eyes held a fire that made people take notice. She wasn't the tallest or the biggest person in the room, but there was something about her presence that commanded respect. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning when she overheard a conversation at the coffee shop next to her gym. 3 Navy SEALs were on leave, visiting their hometown. They sat at a corner table, still carrying themselves with that unmistakable military bearing. Their voices carried across the small cafe as they talked about their recent training exercises. "The new recruits are getting softer every year," said Jake Morrison, a tall blond man with shoulders that seemed to fill his entire chair. "Half of them can't even finish the basic obstacle course without crying for their mothers." His companion, Marcus Rodriguez, laughed and nodded. "Remember when that guy from California tried to tell us he could beat our record times? Took him 3 tries just to complete the course, and he was supposed to be some hotshot athlete." The third man, Tony Chen, was quieter but equally dismissive. "It's not just the men either. You know they're talking about letting women try for SEAL training now? Can you imagine? The physical standards would have to be dropped so low that the program would be meaningless." Sarah felt her jaw clench as she listened. She had heard this kind of talk before, but it never stopped bothering her. The assumption that women were automatically weaker, automatically less capable, made her blood boil. She had spent her entire life proving people wrong about what she could do. "Excuse me," she said, walking over to their table with her coffee in hand. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation." The 3 men looked up at her with expressions ranging from polite interest to barely concealed annoyance. Jake, clearly the leader of the group, raised an eyebrow. "Can we help you with something, miss? I was wondering about these records you mentioned." "What exactly are we talking about?" Marcus laughed. "Nothing you'd need to worry about, sweetheart. Just some military training exercises. Very intense stuff." The condescending tone in his voice made Sarah's hands tighten around her coffee cup. She had dealt with this attitude her entire life, but it never got easier to swallow. "Try me," she said simply. Tony leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Look, lady, no offense, but these are tests designed for elite military personnel. We're talking about obstacle courses that break grown men, physical and mental challenges that most people can't even imagine." "I have a pretty good imagination," Sarah replied. "And I'm in pretty good shape." Jake's expression shifted from polite to mildly amused. "I'm sure you are. You look like you take care of yourself. But there's a difference between going to the gym and doing what we do. These courses are designed to push human beings to their absolute limits." "What kind of limits?" "We're talking about a 2-mile run in full gear, followed by an obstacle course with rope climbs, wall scaling, tire flips, and mud crawls," Marcus explained, his tone suggesting he thought he was being very patient with her. "Then there's weapons handling, tactical decision-making under pressure, and endurance challenges that can last for hours." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds challenging." "Challenging?" Tony almost choked on his coffee. "Lady, our best time for the complete course is 18 minutes and 37 seconds, and that's Jake here, who holds the record at our base. Most guys take at least 25 minutes, and that's after months of specific training." 18 minutes and 37 seconds, Sarah repeated. "That's pretty fast." Jake's amusement was growing more obvious. "Pretty fast? Ma'am. With all due respect, that time represents years of training, peak physical conditioning, and mental toughness that you just can't understand unless you've lived it." "How do you know I haven't lived it?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Marcus looked her up and down. taking in her athletic build, but clearly seeing nothing that impressed him. Because you're sitting in a coffee shop in suburban Texas, asking us about military records, instead of being on a military base earning them, he said bluntly. Sarah felt the familiar surge of determination that had driven her since childhood. It was the same feeling she'd had when the boys in high school said girls couldn't play football. The same feeling she'd had when her college professors suggested she might want to consider a more suitable major than exercise physiology. The same feeling that had pushed her to complete every challenge anyone had ever thrown at her. What if I told you I could beat that record? The silence that followed was broken by Jake's loud laugh. It wasn't a mean laugh exactly, but it was dismissive in a way that cut deeper than outright mockery. Ma'am, I appreciate your confidence, but you're talking about beating a record set by someone who's been training for this specific type of work for 8 years. Someone who's completed SEAL training, served multiple deployments, and lives and breathes physical fitness. I live and breathe physical fitness too. I'm sure you do, Tony said, in a tone that suggested he was sure she didn't. But there's a difference between teaching yoga classes and tactical military training. I don't teach yoga classes. I'm a competitive fitness trainer. I specialize in obstacle course racing and functional fitness. Marcus shrugged. That's great. Really. But we're not talking about some civilian fitness competition. We're talking about military-grade training designed by experts to test the limits of human endurance. Sarah set her coffee cup down on their table with a soft clink. So if I could beat your record, you'd admit you might be wrong about women? The three men exchanged glances. Jake's smile became slightly less friendly. If you could beat my record, which you can't, I'd admit that you're one exceptional woman. But you can't, so it's not really worth discussing. What if we made it worth discussing? What do you mean? Sarah pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. I mean a wager. If I beat your record, you each donate $500 to a women's fitness scholarship fund. If I can't beat it, I'll donate $500 to whatever charity you choose. The men looked at each other again, and this time their expressions were more serious. Jake leaned forward. You're talking about $1,500 total. I'm good for it. This isn't a joke to you, is it? Tony asked, studying her face. No, it's not. Marcus shook his head. Look, we don't want to take your money. This isn't about humiliating anyone. It's just reality. The course we're talking about requires specific training and conditioning that takes years to develop. Then it should be easy money for you. Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering. Finally, he spoke. You really think you can do this? I know I can. The course isn't just here, you know. We'd have to arrange access to proper facilities. This isn't something we can set up in your local gym. Sarah had already thought of that. I know someone at Fort Hood. They have training facilities that would work. You know someone at Fort Hood? Marcus asked, suddenly more interested. My father's a retired Marine. He still has connections. Jake drummed his fingers on the table. Even if we could arrange access, which is a big if, you'd be looking at a legitimate military standard obstacle course. Full gear, timed conditions, no modifications. I wouldn't want any modifications. Tony leaned forward. What kind of time are you thinking you could do? Sarah had been doing mental calculations since the conversation started. She knew her own capabilities, knew what she could push her body to do. The time they'd mentioned was fast, but not impossibly fast. Not for someone who knew what they were doing. 16 minutes. The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down on the table between them. Jake's eyebrows shot up. 16 minutes? You want to beat my record by almost 3 minutes? If I'm going to do this, I might as well make it worthwhile. Marcus laughed, but it wasn't a dismissive laugh this time. It was the kind of laugh that came from genuine surprise. Lady, either you're completely delusional, or you know something we don't. I guess we'll find out. Jake stood up slowly, extending his hand. All right. You've got a deal. But when you're face down in the mud halfway through that course, remember that we tried to warn you. Sarah shook his hand firmly. When I'm holding the new record, remember that you tried to stop me. As she walked away from the coffee shop, Sarah could feel their eyes following her. She knew they were probably laughing, probably making jokes about the crazy woman who thought she could outperform a Navy SEAL. Let them laugh. She had 3 weeks to get ready, and she intended to use every single day. That evening, she called her father. "Dad, I need a favor, and I need you to not ask too many questions." "What kind of favor, Mija?" "I need access to military training facilities. The real deal. Obstacle courses, equipment, everything." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sarah, what have you gotten yourself into?" "I've gotten myself into a situation where I need to prove a point. Can you help me? Or not?" Another pause. "How important is this to you?" "Very important." "All right, I'll make some calls." "But Sarah?" "Yeah? Don't do anything stupid." Sarah smiled, looking out her window at the dark street beyond. "Too late for that, Dad." 3 days later, Sarah found herself standing at the gates of Fort Hood at 5 in the morning. Her father had come through, as he always did. His old friend, Colonel Williams, had agreed to let her use the training facilities during off hours, though he'd made it clear he thought she was making a mistake. "You sure about this, Martinez?" the colonel had asked when they met the previous evening. "These boys aren't playing games. SEAL training is designed to break people down." "I'm not planning on breaking," Sarah had replied. Now, as she stood in the pre-dawn darkness wearing borrowed military gear, she felt the weight of what she'd committed to. The tactical vest was heavier than she'd expected. The boots were stiff and unfamiliar. The helmet felt awkward on her head, but underneath the gear, her body felt strong and ready. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the training instructor who would be supervising her practice runs, emerged from the shadows like a ghost. He was a compact man, with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. Her father had warned her that Rodriguez was tough, but fair. "You're the civilian who thinks she can beat SEAL records," he said, without preamble. "I'm the civilian who's going to beat SEAL records," Sarah corrected. Rodriguez looked her up and down with the kind of clinical assessment that only came from years of evaluating human potential. "We'll see." "You know the rules?" Sarah nodded. They had gone over everything the night before. 2-mile run, in full gear. Obstacle course including rope climbs, wall scaling, tire flips, mud crawls, and various other challenges. Weapons handling test. Tactical decision-making scenario. Everything timed, everything graded on military standards. "Your SEAL friends will be here in 2 hours to witness the attempt," Rodriguez continued. "But first, you're going to run the course with me so you know what you're up against. This isn't about winning or losing. This is about you understanding exactly what you've signed up for." The first practice run was brutal. Sarah had trained for endurance events before, but nothing had prepared her for the specific challenges of military-style obstacles. The rope climb was different from anything she'd experienced in civilian gyms. The wall scaling required techniques she hadn't mastered. The mud crawl was longer and more exhausting than she'd anticipated. By the time she finished, her gear was caked with mud, her hands were bleeding from rope burns, and her legs felt like rubber. Her time was 23 minutes and 47 seconds, not even close to Jake's record. Rodriguez handed her a water bottle without comment. "What did you learn?" Sarah wiped mud from her face and considered the question seriously. "I learned that I was approaching this wrong. I was thinking like a fitness competitor, not like a soldier." "Explain." "The obstacles aren't separate challenges. They're part of a continuous mission. I was treating each one like its own event, instead of conserving energy for the whole course." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "What else?" "The gear changes everything. My movement patterns, my balance, my endurance calculations. I was fighting against it instead of working with it. And," Sarah looked back at the course, analyzing each section in her mind. "The course is designed to test more than physical strength. It's testing mental toughness, tactical thinking, adaptability. I was trying to power through with brute force." "Better," Rodriguez said. "Run it again." The second run was 18 minutes and 53 seconds. Still not fast enough, but much better. Sarah was learning to move efficiently in the gear, to conserve energy where possible, and explode with power when necessary. Again, Rodriguez said. By the end of the morning, Sarah had run the course 6 times. Her best time was 17 minutes and 41 seconds. Close to Jake's record, but not close enough. And she was exhausted. Every muscle in her body was screaming, and she still had the actual attempt ahead of her. Rodriguez studied her as she sat on the ground, trying to catch her breath. "You're better than I expected," he admitted. "But you're not good enough. Not yet. I have 2 hours. 2 hours isn't enough to make up the gap you need. You're still thinking too much, moving too carefully. You need to trust your body and stop trying to control every movement." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the burn in her muscles and the exhaustion in her bones. 2 hours, to find another minute and 4 seconds. It seemed impossible. "Tell me about these SEALs," she said. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "What do you want to know? What makes Jake Morrison so fast? Morrison's been doing this for 8 years. He knows every inch of that course. He doesn't think about the movements anymore. He just flows through them. Plus, he's got something to prove every time he runs." "What do you mean?" "He's not the biggest guy on his team, not the strongest, but he's the fastest, and that's his edge. His whole identity is wrapped up in being the best at this specific thing." Sarah opened her eyes. "So, this matters to him, more than you know. Word is, there are some younger guys coming up who are starting to challenge his times. Morrison's been training extra hard to stay ahead of them." "How hard?" "Hard enough that his commanding officers are worried he might be overtraining. He's been running this course every day for the past month." Sarah felt a spark of something that might have been hope. Every day? Every day. Sometimes twice a day. His teammates think he's obsessed. Or scared. Rodriguez looked at her sharply. "What makes you say that?" "Because I know what it's like to have something you're known for, something that defines you. And I know what it's like when that thing feels threatened." Sarah stood up, feeling energy returning to her legs. "He's not just trying to beat me. He's trying to prove to himself that he's still the best." "So?" "So that means he'll be nervous. And nervous people make mistakes." Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. "You still think you can beat his time?" Sarah looked out at the obstacle course, seeing it now, with different eyes. Not as a series of challenges to overcome, but as a flow of movement. A dance she needed to learn. In her mind, she could see herself moving through it smoothly, efficiently, without hesitation or doubt. "I don't just think I can beat it," she said. "I know I can." When Jake, Marcus, and Tony arrived 2 hours later, they found Sarah sitting calmly in the shade, drinking water and eating an energy bar. She had changed into clean gear and looked surprisingly fresh for someone who had been training all morning. "Ready to eat some humble pie?" Jake asked with a grin. But Sarah noticed that his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. There was tension in his shoulders, a tightness in his jaw that suggested Rodriguez had been right about his nerves. "I'm ready to run," Sarah replied simply. A small crowd had gathered to watch. Word had spread about the unusual challenge, and several off-duty personnel had come to see what would happen. Sarah tried not to think about all the eyes on her as she moved to the starting line. Colonel Williams emerged from the crowd to address the group. "This is an unofficial time trial," he announced. "Civilian participant, Sarah Martinez, will attempt to complete the standard SEAL training course under regulation conditions. Petty Officer Morrison's current record time is 18 minutes and 37 seconds. Jake stepped forward. "Sir, if I may, I'd like to run as well, just to make sure the conditions are fair." Sarah looked at him in surprise. This wasn't part of their original agreement, but she could see the logic. If the conditions were slower than usual, if something was off about the course setup, running back-to-back would reveal it. "That's fine with me," she said. "Who goes first?" "Ladies first," Jake said with a smile that was definitely forced. Sarah walked to the starting line and took a deep breath. In her mind, she ran through the course one more time. 2-mile run to start. maintaining a pace that would leave her with energy for the obstacles. Rope climb using her legs more than her arms. Wall scaling with smooth, efficient movements. Tire flips using her whole body, not just her back. Mud crawl, staying low, and moving steadily. Most importantly, no hesitation, no second guessing. Trust her training and let her body do what it knew how to do. On your mark, Rodriguez called out. Sarah settled into her starting stance, feeling the weight of the gear, the texture of the ground beneath her feet, the cool morning air in her lungs. Set. Everything else fell away. The crowd, the pressure, the doubt. There was only the course ahead and the challenge waiting to be met. Go. Sarah exploded forward, her legs churning as she settled into her pace for the 2-mile run. She could hear Jake shouting encouragement, could sense the crowd watching, but it all seemed distant and unimportant. There was only movement, only the rhythm of her breathing and the steady pounding of her feet. The first mile flew by. Sarah checked her pace and realized she was running faster than she had during practice, but it felt sustainable. Her body had found its groove, and she trusted it to know what it was doing. As she approached the obstacles, Sarah could see the finish line in the distance. 17 minutes to beat. She had this. She knew she had this. The rope climb was smooth and efficient. The wall scaling felt effortless. The tire flips were a rhythm of power and recovery. The mud crawl was just another movement in the dance. And then, as she emerged from the final obstacle and sprinted toward the finish line, Sarah heard something that made her heart race. Rodriguez was calling out times, and the number she heard was impossible. 14 minutes, 30 seconds, 14:31, 14:32. Sarah crossed the finish line and kept running for several more steps before her brain caught up with what she had heard. She turned back toward Rodriguez, gasping for air. What did you say? 14 minutes and 33 seconds, Rodriguez repeated, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent crowd. The silence stretched on for several heartbeats before it was broken by Jake's voice. That's impossible. The silence that followed Jake's declaration felt like it lasted forever. Sarah stood at the finish line, still breathing hard, watching as the 3 Navy SEALs processed what had just happened. Marcus was staring at the stopwatch in Rodriguez's hand as if it had betrayed him personally. Tony's mouth was hanging open. Jake's face had gone completely pale. Check the time again, Jake said, his voice tight. Rodriguez held up the stopwatch for everyone to see. 14 minutes, 33 seconds. Official time. Witnessed by multiple personnel. Colonel Williams stepped forward, his expression unreadable. That's a new base record, he said quietly. By more than 4 minutes. See? The crowd that had gathered began to murmur. Sarah could hear fragments of conversation. Words like impossible and unbelievable and how. She wiped sweat from her face with a shaking hand, still trying to process what had just happened. I want to see her run it again, Jake said suddenly. Right now. Sarah looked at him in surprise. What? I want to see you run it again. That time is impossible. Either there was an equipment malfunction, or the course was set up wrong, or something. No one improves by that much in 2 hours. Rodriguez stepped between them. Mr. Morrison, the course was set to regulation standards. The equipment was checked and double-checked. The time is legitimate. Then how? Marcus demanded, finally finding his voice. How does a civilian fitness trainer beat a SEAL record by 4 minutes? That doesn't make sense. Sarah was asking herself the same question. During her practice runs, she had managed to get close to Jake's time but never beat it by more than a few seconds. The run she had just completed felt different, smoother. But she hadn't expected this kind of dramatic improvement. I don't know, she admitted. It felt good, but I didn't think it was that good. Run it again, Jake insisted. If you can really do that time, prove it. Colonel Williams looked at Sarah. Miss Martinez, you're under no obligation to run again. You've completed the challenge as agreed. Sarah studied Jake's face. She could see the desperation there. The need to believe that what had just happened was somehow a fluke. She understood that desperation. Her entire identity was built around being the best at what he did, and she had just shattered that identity in front of his peers. But she also saw something else in his expression. Not just desperation, but genuine confusion, and underneath it all, a grudging respect. I'll run it again, she said. But first, you run it, like you planned. Jake nodded curtly and moved to the starting line. Sarah could see the tension in every line of his body as he prepared. This wasn't just about beating her time anymore. This was about proving to himself that he was still who he thought he was. On your mark, Rodriguez called. Jake settled into his stance. Sarah had watched him move during their conversations at the coffee shop, had noted the easy confidence in his bearing. Now, she saw something different. A tightness, a forcing that hadn't been there before. Set. Go. Jake exploded from the line with obvious desperation. He was running faster than Sarah had seen anyone run during her practice session, pushing himself to a pace that was clearly unsustainable. By the time he reached the obstacles, Sarah could see that he was already breathing harder than he should have been. The rope climb was still smooth, but there was a jerky quality to it that hadn't been there in the videos Sarah had watched of his previous runs. The wall scaling was powerful, but inefficient. The tire flips were all brute force with no flow. As Jake emerged from the mud crawl and sprinted toward the finish line, Sarah could see that he was giving everything he had. His form was deteriorating, his movements becoming more and more forced, but he was pushing through on will alone. 18 minutes, 58 seconds, Rodriguez announced as Jake crossed the finish line and immediately bent over, gasping for air. 21 seconds slower than his record. Jake stared at the stopwatch, as if it had personally insulted him. That's not right, he said between gasps. I run this course all the time. I know every step. My time should have been better, not worse. Sarah walked over to where he was bent over, still trying to catch his breath. You were trying too hard, she said quietly. What? You were trying too hard. Fighting against the course instead of flowing with it. Jake straightened up, his face flushed with exertion and frustration. What are you talking about? What? This morning, during practice, I was making the same mistake. I was trying to control every movement, to force every step. It wasn't until I stopped trying so hard that I started moving efficiently. Marcus stepped forward. Are you saying Jake doesn't know how to run his own course? I'm saying that pressure makes people do things differently than they normally would. And desperation makes people try too hard. Tony was shaking his head. This is crazy. You're a civilian. You trained for a few hours. How is it possible that you understand course strategy better than someone who's been doing this for years? Sarah considered the question seriously. Maybe it's because I approached it differently. You all know this course so well that you have set ways of doing things. I had to figure out the most efficient way from scratch. Or maybe, Jake said, his breathing finally starting to return to normal. You're just naturally better at this than I am. The admission hung in the air like a white flag. Sarah could see what it cost him to say it. Could see the way his shoulders slumped slightly as he acknowledged the possibility that his identity might not be as solid as he had believed. I don't think that's true, Sarah said. I think you're probably better than me at most things related to this kind of training. I just had a good day. A good day? Marcus laughed. But there was no humor in it. You beat a base record by 4 minutes, and you call it a good day? Run it again, Jake said suddenly. Sarah looked at Rodriguez, who shrugged. It's your call, Martinez. You've already proven whatever you came here to prove. Sarah walked back to the starting line, her legs still feeling strong despite the previous run. As she settled into her stance, she tried to recapture the feeling from her record-breaking attempt. The flow, the ease, the sense of moving with the course rather than fighting against it. Ready? Rodriguez asked. Sarah nodded. In her peripheral vision, she could see the crowd watching. Jake, Marcus, and Tony standing together, their expressions tense with anticipation, Colonel Williams checking his own watch. Various base personnel who had gathered to witness something unprecedented. On your mark, set, go. This time, Sarah was conscious of trying to recreate her previous performance, and that consciousness made everything feel slightly different. She was still fast, still efficient. But there was a quality of effort that had been absent from her record run. The 2-mile run felt strong but not effortless. The obstacles were smooth but not transcendent. She was running well, but she could feel that she was running rather than simply moving. When she crossed the finish line, she knew before Rodriguez announced the time that it wouldn't match her previous effort. 16 minutes, 47 seconds, Rodriguez called out. Still fast enough to beat Jake's original record, but nowhere near her previous time. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. She had suspected that her first run was the result of something that couldn't be easily repeated. Some combination of preparation, mindset, and pure flow state that had aligned perfectly for those 14 minutes. Jake walked over to her, his expression thoughtful. So, what happened the first time? With Re-7, Sarah wiped sweat from her face, considering the question. I think everything just came together. All the training, all the practice runs, all the mental preparation, plus, I wasn't trying to prove anything to myself. I was just trying to prove something to you. And the second time, I was trying to prove something to myself. And that made me tight. Made me think too much. Marcus and Tony joined them, their expressions ranging from confused to grudgingly impressed. So what you're saying, Tony said slowly, is that your best performance came when you weren't worried about performing? Something like that. Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the obstacle course that had defined so much of his identity. I've been running this course every day for a month, he said finally. Every single day, trying to get faster, trying to stay ahead of the younger guys who are coming up. And today, I ran it slower than I have in years. Because you were trying too hard, Sarah said again. Because I was afraid, Jake corrected. Afraid that someone would come along and prove that I'm not as special as I thought I was. And did they? Jake looked at her with something that might have been gratitude. Yeah, they did. And it turns out that's not the end of the world. Colonel Williams approached the group, carrying an official-looking document. Miss Martinez, congratulations. Your time of 14 minutes and 33 seconds is now the official record for this course. We'll need to submit it to higher command for verification. But as far as this base is concerned, you're the new champion. Sarah stared at the document, still hardly believing what had happened. What does this mean? It means, Williams said with a slight smile, that you've just proven something that a lot of people thought was impossible. And it means that these 3 gentlemen owe some money to a women's fitness scholarship fund. Jake reached into his wallet without hesitation. A deal's a deal. He pulled out his checkbook and started writing. Although, I have to say, this isn't how I expected this day to go. How did you expect it to go? Sarah asked. Jake finished writing his check and handed it to her. I expected to watch you struggle through the course, fail to come close to my time, and then explain to you why physical standards exist for a reason. And instead, you taught me something about those standards. They're not about gender or size or background. They're about what someone can do when they stop limiting themselves with what they think they should be able to do. Marcus and Tony wrote their checks as well, both looking somewhat stunned by the day's events. As Sarah took the checks, totaling $1,500 for the scholarship fund, she felt a sense of completion that was about more than just winning a bet. There's something else, Rodriguez said, approaching the group with a folder in his hands. Miss Martinez, I've been authorized to offer you something. What kind of something? A consultation position with our training program. Turns out, what you figured out about flow states and efficient movement could be valuable for our instructors. Sarah looked around at the faces watching her. Jake, no longer defensive but genuinely interested. Marcus and Tony, their skepticism replaced by curiosity. Colonel Williams, nodding his approval. The crowd of base personnel who had witnessed something they would talk about for years to come. "I'm honored," she said finally. "But I think I learned as much from all of you as you might learn from me." "Maybe that's the point," Jake said. "Maybe the best training happens when people challenge each other's assumptions." As Sarah changed out of her gear and prepared to leave the base, she reflected on how the day had unfolded. She had come here to prove a point about what women could do, about what people could accomplish when they refused to accept limitations. She had proven that point. But she had also learned something unexpected. The real victory wasn't in the record time or the money for the scholarship fund. The real victory was in the conversation that had followed. In watching Jake move from defensiveness to curiosity. In seeing Marcus and Tony begin to question their own assumptions about capability and gender. Most importantly, she had learned something about her own potential. For 14 minutes and 33 seconds, she had moved with the efficiency and power that surprised even her. That feeling, that sense of what was possible when everything aligned perfectly, would stay with her forever. 6 months later, Sarah received a letter from Jake Morrison. He had returned to his base and immediately changed his training approach, focusing more on flow and efficiency rather than pure force. His times had improved. And more importantly, he had started teaching other SEALs about the mental aspects of performance that Sarah had demonstrated. The letter ended with a simple statement. "Thank you for showing me that the best way to stay strong is to never stop learning." Sarah smiled as she folded the letter and put it in her desk drawer, next to the certificate from Fort Hood that proclaimed her the holder of the base obstacle course record. Outside her office window, she could see her newest class of students working on the obstacle course she had built behind her gym. Half of them were women, and all of them were learning what Sarah had learned that day at Fort Hood. That the only real limitations are the ones we accept. That performance isn't about meeting other people's expectations, but about exceeding your own, and that sometimes, the most important victories come not from proving others wrong, but from inspiring them to think differently. The student who reminded her most of herself was a young woman named Jessica, who had been told by her high school coach that she wasn't built for athletics. Jessica was currently leading the class through the rope climb, moving with the kind of efficient grace that Sarah recognized. Sarah walked outside to join the training session, ready to see what was possible when people stopped limiting themselves with what they thought they should be able to do. In the distance, she could hear Jessica calling out encouragement to a struggling classmate, and Sarah smiled. The lesson was being passed on,